I think a lot of members are going to reflect on their thinking after this historic moment.
This case should be dismissed. This is not a case. And she should probably be dismissed also because she's terrible and grossly incompetent.
He flew out there, he said not guilty, and this, of course, is a result of something that absolutely did not go according to plan, which is the disintegration of the plea agreement.
Hello, I'm Nicole Killian in Washington, and welcome to America Decides. Kevin McCarthy has been ousted as House Speaker after a vote in the chamber. 8 Republicans voted to remove him from the position. Florida Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz filed a resolution yesterday which set up the vote. He has criticized how the Speaker has handled spending since Republicans retook the chamber. CBS News politics reporter Zach Hudak joins us now. And Zach, obviously, we both have worked on the Hill. And just from your experience covering Capitol Hill, I just want you to break down for our viewers how we got here to this historic moment.
Nicole, this is an event that, as you know, has been we've been waiting for it to happen since McCarthy was elected as Speaker of the House. It took 12.5 votes just to get him through that vote, and he had to make a number of deals with the far-right wing of his party just to get accepted as Speaker, just to get sworn in. And among those deals was the ability to bring a motion to vacate the chair with a single person bringing it to the floor. So this is something that we have been anticipating for about a year and a half here. And we have known that he would, eventually face this. I was a bit surprised because Kevin McCarthy, throughout his time in the House, has been sort of a survivor. He is very good at making relationships with members and having members feel strong loyalty toward him. So as the Congress went on and as he made deals here and there with Democrats to keep the government funded, just this past week, for instance, he continued to anger that far-right wing of the party to the point that it boiled over, where he did not have enough support in the Republican caucus to keep him in the Speaker's chair.
I also want to bring in my other colleague, congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane. Scott, I know the Speaker the former Speaker just walked by you a short time ago. What did he have to say?
I asked him point blank if he's going to run again for Speaker. He told me he's going to make a statement shortly. He's now back in his office, potentially having calls with some of the people who defected or with Democrats to see if he can secure what he needs to secure to run again. But in the meantime, there's some things to note logistically and administratively. The Speaker pro tem, acting Speaker, is Patrick McHenry, a McCarthy loyalist from North Carolina, and they have recessed the House to the subject to the call of the chair, which means indefinitely they're going to be in recess. So there's no imminent new vote for Speaker. I talked to 2 of the defectors, Bob Good of Virginia and Tim Burchett of Tennessee, and asked each if they had a name, somebody they're going to put out there as their nominee to be Speaker. Neither said they did. So at this point, we kind of are where we were in January, aren't we, Nicole? Where we're on the cusp of a potential marathon drawn-out vote for Speaker. Only at this point, we're 9 months into the Congress, and we are right in the middle of a tenuous time where the government funding is being measured by weeks and days, and the government shutdown is looming in November.
Zach, I want to turn back to you because we just heard from Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, who forced this motion to vacate. He spoke to reporters a short time ago. Let's take a listen.
I think there was a stage of denial, and I've certainly experienced a good amount of their anger, and now we appear to be headed toward bargaining. I think the world of Steve Scalise. I think he'd make a phenomenal speaker.
Is this a victory for Matt Gaetz?
Matt Gaetz is one of the few people who seem to have come out on top here, if you look to it the way that Matt Gaetz looks to it. Matt Gaetz and the far-right flank of the Republican caucus in the House views the current situation in the country as we would rather shut down the government. We would rather deal with the implications of that than continue to fund things like the war in Ukraine. So is it a victory overall? No. Is it a victory for the American people? No. But this is a victory for folks in the Republican Party who feel like Kevin McCarthy and mainstream Republicans are out of step with what needs to be done to get this country back on track, what needs to be done to get this country back into a good financial position. So for Matt Gaetz, he and a handful of other Republicans are the few winners in this.
All right, Zach Hudak, Scott MacFarlane, thank you so much for joining us. I want to turn now to our political panel. We are joined now by Maura Gillespie. She is a former congressional aide, as well as Jonathan Cott, who is a partner at Capitol Counsel and previously served as a senior advisor to both Senators Chris Coons and Joe Manchin. Again, want to thank both of you guys for joining us, and Maura, because you did work on the Hill for such a long time. I really just want to start by getting your reaction to all of this.
It's a sad day. I mean, this is not something that we should be celebrating. I don't think anyone who cares about the institution is celebrating, except for Matt Gaetz, obviously, but he also doesn't care about the institution that he serves in. It's shocking to me, not so shocking, but it's sad to me that somebody who is in Congress doesn't actually understand how Congress works or want it to work. This is just, because again, Matt Gaetz doesn't have a plan. There is no plan. He says that Scalise would make a great
But then why
speaker.
do you think he was successful today?
Because Democrats aren't going to back Kevin McCarthy, right? They don't have any reason to. He hasn't done anything to earn their trust or their respect, quite frankly. And so it's not surprising to me that they weren't willing to step up and help him out. It's not their job to do so. But it's just a sad situation that we're witnessing. And again, it's going to hurt Republicans because this just shows an inability to govern, as sad as that is.
And Jonathan, I want to get your reaction as well. I mean, you've worked with a number of Democrats. Why don't you think they back the speaker in the end?
Because there's absolutely no reason that Democrats who disagree with Kevin McCarthy on every single thing he stands for would ever back him. They're unified behind their leader, Hakeem Jeffries. Nancy Pelosi never had this problem, and she had very slim majorities. The idea that Democrats would ever do this was born out of some, fantasy West Wing episode.
But they could have voted present. I mean, there were other tactics.
Right, but there's no reason for them to not vote the way they feel. They didn't have to do tactics or anything. That would have been great political theater, but Democrats voted the way they believed, that Hakeem Jeffries should be the leader of the House. And the Republicans are doing a very good job of making the case that Democrats and Hakeem Jeffries should be in control of the House, since they can't even govern it for a year without having
do you think there's any scenario where that happens?
That would require Republican switching, which I don't think Matt Gaetz stands for a lot. He stands for getting on Fox News, which doesn't seem to be taking him that often. Now he has to go on Newsmax and OAN, but I don't think they stand for helping Democrats get the speakership.
Maura, what do you think are the next steps here? Do you think the speaker will run again, or the former speaker?
He has said that he will. So I think he's probably back in his office, huddled with his team, figuring out what's the next steps.
But is there anything he can do to change the calculus?
Aside from what he did back in January, continue to give them whatever they want. But again, Bob Good and Matt Gaetz have made it pretty clear that there's nothing that Kevin McCarthy could do to sway them. So I really don't see where we go from here. And again, this has it's so short-sighted. It's so self-serving what Matt Gaetz is doing, because his complaint is that they're not doing enough on the economy. If you want to make an impact on the economy, you should want to win elections. You're not going to win an election by, one, shutting down the government, and two, holding Congress hostage and not letting the House do its work. I mean, this is just, again, we're talking about political theater, but it doesn't have an end sight. There's no goal here, and he doesn't have a plan. And that's the really frustrating part here. Matt Gaetz, his only plan thus far was to get on all the Sunday shows. Check, he did that. To oust Kevin McCarthy, which he just did just now, and get the attention for it, so that he's not put attention on his, ethics investigations and other issues that he has back in Florida.
Yeah, and Jonathan, I guess just to go back to you, and again, trying to read between the lines here in terms of why Democrats voted the way that they did. I mean, if you look at the big picture, I mean, this slows everything. This gums up the work. We know Congress has to approve more government funding in the next 45 days. This now kind of throws everything into limbo. That's not necessarily in the interest of Democrats. So just for the sake of continuing government, again, why don't you think they would back the speaker on this?
I think it's there is no scenario ever that Democrats are going to back Kevin McCarthy to be speaker. I don't know where that's come from. Democrats
who do you think they'd be willing to work with then?
Hakeem Jeffries is the leader of the Democratic Party. He is the person they want to be Speaker. They will work to make him Speaker. That's the only person Democrats will work to make Speaker. Democrats are ready to work to keep the government running and functioning. Keep in mind, the only people that shut down the government are Republicans because they don't actually believe government helps and works for their constituents. I find it very odd that a lot of Republicans do everything they can to get to Washington to then say Washington shouldn't work or doesn't work. But Democrats will work with whoever is the Speaker to get bipartisan bills done, which they did under Nancy Pelosi and they've done under Kevin McCarthy. But they're not going to help save Kevin McCarthy. James Carville told Democrats, and we all believe this, when your enemy is drowning, throw him a freaking anvil.
Morris, I mean, is there anyone you see that can rise to the occasion if the Speaker or former Speaker does not run again?
So I do think so, because we've had that happen in the past, right? We had plenty of Democrats who came out and said that they would have, helped John Boehner during this time. And he had countless Democrats who were willing to, either not show up for the vote or back him because they saw the greater good. But that's also because he had their trust. And he did, maybe they didn't always agree on policy, but they knew that he was going to serve the whole House. And in moments when push came to shove, that he was going to look out for the interests of the whole House and not just his party and not just his flank. They could trust that he would do that. And they also respected him. So I think that that's obviously a huge difference here, obviously what we're seeing, and to your point about them not wanting to step up and help Kevin McCarthy. But the list of members who they would be willing to help, I do believe is very, very small. Just given how fractured things have been ever since, honestly, January 6th and after so many Republicans voted not to certify the elections, Democrats in Congress don't want to be associated with those members. So it's going to be really hard to, one, find someone that could get the votes that is needed by the mass majority of the Republican conference, and then could also acquire a couple votes or non-votes from Democrats. So and whoever's being mentioned right now is probably slim to be on that list, maybe Patrick McHenry, but the right flank won't go for that.
I think we have bipartisan support for John Boehner coming back as Speaker. That's what we heard.
But does he want to do it?
No, he does not.
It's a no. Well, thank you so much, Maura. Jonathan, appreciate you for being on. We will continue our coverage of the ousting of Speaker Kevin McCarthy right after the break. Our Robert Costa joins us next for more. You're streaming America Decides. As the House voted to oust Kevin McCarthy, former President Donald Trump returned to court in New York City for the second day of his civil fraud trial. CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa joins me now. And Bob, also some major developments with this as well, with a New York judge imposing a gag order. Do we know what triggered that, and also if the former president is going to abide by this?
Good to be with you. Here inside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan earlier today, there was a dramatic standoff between former President Trump and Judge Arthur Engoron. Judge Engoron, who's leading this civil trial about Trump's finances and about alleged fraud committed by the Trump Organization over the years, lashed out about how Trump has handled social media. On Truth Social, Trump's social media platform earlier today, Trump issued a statement about a clerk who works for the judge, and he said that this clerk, falsely, is the girlfriend of Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York. And because of that statement, and also a link to this clerk's Instagram profile, the judge was really concerned about the safety of his staff and his clerk. And he came back into the courtroom and said to Trump and his team, effectively, you now have a gag order when it comes to talking about my staff, that this is out of line, and if you violate this again, there will be serious consequences.
And what might those consequences be?
Well, this is a civil lawsuit trial. It's not a criminal trial. But a judge can do a lot of things to make it painful for a defendant if he, in some way, or she feels that the defendant is violating the sanctity of the courtroom and the sanctity of the process and the rule of law in terms of disciplinary action inside the proceeding. This is a 3-month trial that's been scheduled to go on until mid-December, late December. And they could make it tough for Trump and his lawyers as they proceed. And already the judge is showcasing that he's going to be tough on Trump. I felt like it was a refrain throughout the day sitting in the courtroom. Overruled, overruled. Kept hearing that from Judge Engoron as the Trump lawyers tried to make their arguments and objections.
Former President Trump has also been quite defiant since the start of this trial. Here's what he had to say today about the case and New York Attorney General Letitia James. Let's take a listen.
This case should be dismissed. This is not a case. And she should probably be dismissed also because she's terrible and grossly incompetent, as I've said.
So can we expect the former president to return to court again?
Yes, he told reporters he is willing to come testify. His son Eric and Don Jr. are co-defendants in this case. Ivanka Trump may be called to testify. So this is a family affair potentially for the Trump family as they try to defend this business, which isn't just a family business. It's so intertwined with Trump's political persona, his political career. And that's why Trump was here in the courtroom for day two, talking to his associates today. It's evident that this is something he thinks is deeply personal. His father started the Trump Organization decades ago, Fred Trump, here in New York, and he doesn't want to have this company that his family built that's so core to who he is stained by a civil lawsuit from the state of New York. And so that's why he's sitting in this courthouse voluntarily, at least for the last 2 days, but he's also busy on the campaign trail. And there's no guarantee he's going to be here every day for what can be somewhat dry proceedings about accounting.
Yeah, I was going to say, since you have been in the courtroom these last 2 days, what has his demeanor been like?
I have seen him whisper with his lawyers. He has sometimes crossed his arms and tilted his head and shook his head when he seems frustrated with arguments being made by the state attorneys. He hasn't spoken up in the courtroom. There's kind of the quiet of the courtroom itself, and then there's the ferocity outside the courtroom in Trump's comments to reporters. He takes a few steps outside the courtroom, and there's a whole, almost a wing of cameras there, and he likes to speak to them during breaks. But at one point, the judge chided Trump and his lawyers for being too long on their break and said, quote, "I run a tight ship." And that was a message to not spend so much time in the hallways giving your comments to reporters about the judge and about his staff and about the whole enterprise.
Yeah, and speaking of some of the comments the former president made, I know he did also reference the fact that this is taking him off the trail. So what impact could this case have on his campaign and, you know, the broader race as a whole?
So many of his rivals right now, they tell me behind the scenes, along with their top strategists, that they want political oxygen. They can't get it. Speaker McCarthy, now former Speaker McCarthy, at least for the moment, dealing with his drama on Capitol Hill. Trump dealing with this. It's a lot for others to get attention.
All right, Bob Costa reporting from us in Manhattan. Thanks so much for joining us. We have a lot more to get to this special hour on America Decides, including more on the ousting of House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Straight ahead, you are streaming America Decides. Let's bring back in our political panel. Jonathan Cott and Maura Gillespie joins us now. Jonathan is a partner at Capitol Counsel and previously served as senior advisor to both Senators Chris Coons and Joe Manchin. Maura is the founder of Blue Stack Strategies and the former advisor to Speaker John Boehner and former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger. And so, you know, I know we left off our previous discussion kind of talking about next steps, but, you know, how long do you think, Maura, this will take to resolve?
It could take some time. You know, Patrick McHenry is currently Speaker Pro Temp, so they've got a little bit of time here to hopefully figure out where to go next with the conference, kind of bring them together. But it's going to be a tough sell, I think, to get, we talked about before, to get Democrats to kind of resolve this issue, because clearly the Republicans are not going to be able to do it on their own.
Jonathan, how do you think the White House perceives this, particularly because we know, and we just heard from President Biden earlier this week, pushing lawmakers to act on Ukraine funding? I mean, that was supposed to be the next step after approving this funding to keep the government up and running for the next 45 days. How does that get done?
I think it's very unfortunate. I think the White House, you know, was hoping that they could work in a bipartisan way, which they've done a lot of the times in the last 2 or 3 years. But, you know, there's nobody to actually negotiate with at this point. I don't know if the Biden White House is going to see Patrick McHenry as somebody they can actually negotiate with, who can hold up the deals that they make with him. So it's unfortunate, mostly for the country, that we're at this point, because Republicans can't pass the appropriations bills they want. We're getting, you know, closer and closer to another government shutdown, because all we did was kick the can down the road 45 days, we're going to run up on that real fast. And the trust has broken down in the House on the Republican side. So I don't even know how they get to 218 on pieces of legislation going forward. I think that's the bigger problem.
I know, Maura, as we explained, you are a former advisor to former House Speaker John Boehner. I mean, he faced the threat of removal at one point in time and actually stepped down. I know you've kind of been in touch with him. What kind of reaction are you hearing that you can share, if any?
He's, the speaker is not going to, former Speaker Boehner is not looking to weigh in on this issue. I think it's best that he leaves it to those who are currently, carrying the burden of our democracy and our government right now, who are in office. But I will say that, again, when he was faced with this in 2015, he had been thinking about retirement for some time. So he's in a different position. He was just 65, it was a different time for him. And he had checked the boxes he wanted to check, and he saw an opportunity to take a step back, set up, and work with the Democrats to get things done and clear the deck for incoming then Speaker Paul Ryan. So to me, obviously, I think of it in high regards of how he handled it. He bowed out gracefully because it was his time and when he felt was right to do. And this is a completely different situation that we're facing right now. There is serious rifts here. And again, what we talked about earlier.
I mean, do you think this is more about McCarthy and the lack of trust in him, or is there a bigger issue with respect to the Republican Party?
There's a huge issue in the Republican Party as far as this big rift. I will say that what you're seeing in a large part of the party, especially in the House conference, is they are uniting around the buffoonery of Matt Gaetz. So that's a positive. I'm going to take that as a positive, that they are united and they think that Matt Gaetz is doing this simply to fundraise and to get attention and to get on TV, and that's what his goal is, because he doesn't have an actual plan. So that part is a positive. But for Republicans generally, this is a problem moving forward, because the American people are going to see this and see it as a failure to govern. And that's going to hurt them in the 24 election. So it's a real problem, a fundamental problem for Republicans to bounce back from and to kind of course correct.
Yeah, I was going to say to you, Scott, I mean, it seems to a certain extent that the former speaker is being punished for working across the aisle with Democrats, but at the end of the day, what does that say about the future of the institution if you can't work with the other side?
It's unfortunate, because I think what the American people want is for people to work across the aisle. That's how we get things done. We got some historic pieces of legislation passed because Democrats and Republicans were willing to work together. I think every poll you see, Americans feel that Washington is more divided, and they wish people were working across the aisle. Look, when the cameras go off, 80% of these members of Congress are friends. They'll talk to people. It's the politics that gets involved that makes it harder for them. And it's people like Matt Gaetz who throw these grenades in and have no plan on how to actually come out of it alive. There is no plan for him. He has no, speaker that he prefers or he thinks will work better. He was part of every other problem that he's now blaming Kevin McCarthy for. If his biggest problem with Kevin McCarthy is he worked with Democrats to keep the government open and funded and fund actual priorities that the American people want, I think that says a lot more about Matt Gaetz than it says about anything else. And I'll tell you, when your old boss announced that he was retiring, the first thing Senator Manchin did was run over there to thank him for everything that he had helped get done. And I think that's what people want more of, is members who are willing to work together. Adam Kinzinger is one of those people who's absolutely saying, we can work together, we can get things done. And I think that's what we need to see more of.
People want that. To John's point, people want that. I think they see the partisanship and this toxic fighting just to fight as frustrating. They're getting a little sick of it, and I don't blame them. I think that there are a lot of issues in Congress right now that are unfortunately on full display, and you don't get to see a lot of those relationships that are actually happening behind the scenes, because people are just more interested in, again, what Matt Gaetz is doing, his shenanigans, and it's a shame.
I want to push you further. I mean, do you think ultimately this will cost Republicans at the polls next year?
I do. I think if they can't figure a way to govern and show the American people because when people are looking at issues, especially as we look into the next election, the economy is first and foremost. Second to that is probably safety and security. Those are two issues where Americans tend to trust Republicans to handle those two issues better than Democrats. what is this going to tell them if we can't get just simply governing? And again, to John's point, we can't even vote on a bill to stop the government from shutting down, and we're getting penalized for that. So it's going to be a real problem for Republicans to not only grapple with this, but a host of other issues going into 24.
Yeah, Maura Gillespie, Jonathan Cott, thanks as always for being with us. I want to turn now to CBS News politics reporter Zach Hudak. And Zach, obviously, you know, this is still continuing to unfold and develop, but what are you hearing in terms of reaction, both from Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill?
I am hearing outrage from McCarthy's allies and from the folks who wanted things to continue on as they have, particularly outrage aimed at Matt Gaetz and at the other generally far-right Republicans, with the exception of Nancy Mace, who voted to remove Kevin McCarthy. On the other hand, I am hearing some relief from Democrats who are excited to have a potential of a new speaker. There are a number of Democrats who view McCarthy as, at this point, a far-right MAGA Republican. Whether or not that's truly the case, they are excited for a fresh slate. They are looking at these last 9 months or so as wasted time in Congress, where they could have been getting things done, but where Speaker McCarthy was bowing to the extremes in his party. Whether or not it will be possible to get someone in who is able to make things go a little bit more smoothly is yet to be seen. And that's something that folks on both sides of the aisle are expressing concern about whether there is someone who can actually get elected as Speaker and can actually remain Speaker long enough to get some things done in this Congress.
I mean, if the former Speaker decides to run again, do you think he has a chance at this point?
You know, I learned long ago not to ever fully count out Kevin McCarthy. He is extremely talented at making relationships and at having other members feel indebted to him and loyal to him. So I would not count him out. This is a guy who managed to get elected as Speaker over the course of 17 votes. He repeatedly failed, and there were a number of efforts to get someone else to step in. Anyone else who would have had a shot was too loyal to him to go against him to step in. So this is a major uphill battle. It seems unlikely that he would regain his speakership. But as I said, I would never count out Kevin McCarthy and his ability to make and maintain strong relationships on Capitol Hill.
I want to quickly play some sound that the former Speaker said. He obviously had an interview here on CBS News on Face the Nation on Sunday, which some Democrats say was a factor in their decision to oust the Speaker. Let's take a listen to what the former Speaker told our Margaret Brennan.
I wasn't sure it was going to pass. You want to know why? Because the Democrats tried to do everything they can not to let it pass. They did
Democrats were the ones who voted for this in a larger number than Republicans to keep the continuing resolution alive.
Did you watch the floor yesterday?
Oh, yes. Okay, 90 Republicans voted against it.
Now, we learned earlier today that Democrats played that clip during their caucus meeting this morning. Why do you think that this may have been a factor in Democrats' decision not to back the Speaker or the former Speaker?
I think it reinforced the perception among many of them that he is, for lack of a better word, sort of a snake of a politician, someone who will make a deal and then publicly not say he made a deal and publicly bash you over the head. And I think Democrats sort of feel that way about Kevin McCarthy and the way that he has acted as Speaker so far.
All right. Well, Zach Hudak, appreciate you as always for weighing in. We're going to take a quick break, but we will have more on the ousting of House Speaker Kevin McCarthy just ahead. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Kevin McCarthy has been ousted as House Speaker after a vote in the chamber. 8 Republicans voted to remove him from the position. Capitol Hill reporter for Axios, Julia Grace Burke, joins us now. Julia Grace, good to see you. I know we see each other often in the halls, but, you know, what is the mood like now on the Hill?
Well, there's definitely some anger from some of the moderate Republicans, both toward the conservatives that ousted him and towards moderate Democrats that they were kind of hoping were going to be able to bail McCarthy out and help him keep his speakership. So it's definitely going to be an interesting conference meeting at 6:30 to see how Republicans kind of plan to work through this moving forward.
Did this come as a surprise?
No, I think I've talked to a lot of members that said that they've been surprised that McCarthy has made it this long, but he kind of kept making deals and kept conservatives happy with some of the concessions that he made during the initial speaker's race. Now, that being said, we've heard Matt Gaetz and his allies kind of really rail against him about the appropriations process and been threatening this for weeks. So not a total surprise, but I do think, having spoken to Congressman Gaetz, that he did kind of initially think that Democrats would bail McCarthy out, which ultimately didn't happen.
Why don't you think that was the case?
Well, I think that moderate Democrats, after have a closer relationship with their leader, Hakeem Jeffries, than they did Pelosi. I think that they were going to follow his lead there. And I think that former Speaker McCarthy, his kind of rhetoric on the Sunday shows, taking aim at Democrats, kind of blaming them for the potential of a government shutdown before they ultimately averted it, didn't sit well with a lot of members.
We know that Congressman McHenry is kind of temporarily in the role as of now. I mean, what are you hearing from members about who they would like to see as Speaker?
Now, I've talked to a lot of members in recent days about potential alternatives, and I know Majority Leader Steve Scalise's name has been brought up. Majority Whip Tom Cole's name has been brought up. Republican Study Committee Chairman Kevin Hern's name brought up. There's been an array of names, but who can get 218 is going to be kind of the million-dollar question there. It's not going to be easy in a slim majority.
I mean, do you think we're going to see a repeat of what we saw back in January?
I mean, it's very possible that a lot of these McCarthy allies kind of renominate him there, and that it's potential that he could strike a deal and ultimately some Democrats back off and vote present, and we could see another era of Speaker McCarthy. So there are a lot of different scenarios of how things could play out here, but I think we'll know a lot more after 6:30.
What does this mean for the work of Congress right now? You know, I'm sure, as you know, and talking to a lot of moderate Republicans, their concerns were, look, you know, we've got to still find a way to fund the government. We've got to deal with this issue of Ukraine. How does that happen without a speaker?
Now, I think things are kind of going to be ground to a halt until they figure out the speaker situation. We heard that kind of concern from members like Chip Roy, who was kind of an original McCarthy defector in January, Byron Donald, some of these guys that weren't particularly big on McCarthy initially, but felt they need to get the work done, especially these individual appropriation bills. So it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate it, but time without a speaker is definitely going to kind of slow down their process.
Obviously, we know that Congressman Gaetz was really the one who kind of initiated this motion to vacate. Why was he so successful here, considering it seems like he didn't have a lot of goodwill among his fellow Republicans?
Well, I think this clean CR definitely was kind of the breaking point, the straw on the camel's back for a lot of these conservatives that ultimately decided to oust him there. I mean, I also think there's probably some personal animosity toward McCarthy from the group that ultimately decided to oust him, and they were kind of looking at reasons. Different types of stopgap measures were kind of weighed along the way. So Congressman Gaetz ultimately pulled the trigger and was successful there.
Is there any scenario where he could be Speaker?
I don't see the vast majority of his conference or the Democratic conference being able to rally behind him. I don't think the support would be there, but it will certainly be interesting to kind of see who kind of emerges now that the seat is open.
All right. Well, Julia Grace, we'll let you get back to your reporting. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Several high-profile Republicans on the House floor today made their case as to why Speaker McCarthy should not be ousted. Here was Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie.
This is a referendum on this institution. We have tried regular order. Speaker McCarthy has tried regular order. If regular order fails today, if you vacate the Speaker, nobody is going to try it again.
Gentleman's time has expired.
This institution will fail.
I want to go back to our political panel, Maura Gillespie and Jonathan Cott. And Jonathan, since you spent a lot of time in the Senate, I mean, how do you think this is going to play with them particularly? I mean, I'm thinking about Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Who does he work with now and how?
I don't know. I mean, I guess he turns to Patrick McHenry. mean, this doesn't help the Senate's air of superiority in calling ourselves the upper chamber, since this stuff doesn't really happen in the Senate. But yeah, it's going to be more chaos, not just in the House, but both chambers have to pass bills. The Senate can pass all the bills at once. If there's nowhere for it to go in the House, it creates a real problem and a vacuum. And I think you've already seen a bunch of Republican senators upset with Matt Gaetz because they know that he's interrupting how business can get done. Just the basic concept of governing isn't able to proceed because of one guy and because he got, 7 or 8 people to go along with him who also have no interest in actually governing. And it's not like they're not holding this hostage for some policy priorities. They're holding it hostage so they can get on TV more and raise more money and get on Twitter more. And Matt Gaetz probably so that he can raise money for his legal defense fund. I think that's the real problem here. And yeah, it's going to be difficult for Mitch McConnell to find anybody to negotiate with. And look, at some point, we have the 4 corners, the leaders in the House and Senate all come together. Who's that going to be in the House? And I think that causes a real problem for Congress in general, not just the House.
And Maura, do you think Senate Republicans should have been more hands-on here? I know just from, covering the minority leader, he has been clear, even though he meets regularly with the former speaker or met regularly with him, he was always clear to kind of give him his space and say, I'm not going to tell him what to do. But was this a case where maybe McConnell and others should have been more hands-on?
I think one of the problems is that so many in the far right of the party have villainized Mitch McConnell, have accused the Senate of doing nothing, and kind of made it a them versus us. And that's a problem for many reasons, but it all goes back to relationships. And there have been seriously fractured relationships on Capitol Hill for some time now. And we're seeing that play out because it doesn't benefit the Senate to get involved in this. It doesn't benefit the Senate Republicans to get involved in this. Any leverage they had coming out of Saturday night is gone now. And so it's got to be frustrating for them, as it is for everyone else. But again, it goes down to relationships. So if McCarthy had a better relationship with Mitch McConnell, maybe we would have a different conversation. But that's not the case.
All right. Well, Maura and Scott, thank you again. And we'll be right back. Welcome back to America Decides. We are following the ouster of Kevin McCarthy from his position as House Speaker. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us now. And Scott, we know Republicans are meeting this evening. Where do they go from here?
Could be a long meeting, Nicole. We've seen a few of those this week already. The bottom line for their meetings and for what happens next is, what is the plan B, or who is the plan B? There never really has been an alternative to Kevin McCarthy during his 9-month speakership, which was the leverage he was wielding, not just during that 15-round marathon vote in January, but in the months since, when some of these defectors inside the conference threatened to go after him. Today they made their move. Today they succeeded, and there remains no prominent or vocalized plan B until they come up with someone who can garner the support of a majority of the House, the entirety of the Republican conference, and or composition of Republicans and Democrats. Kevin McCarthy has the ability, the capacity, perhaps the interest of putting his name back in there again to try to run again. But there's a bit of a hold here on this House floor until somebody comes up with an idea. They've pulled the drapes, they've locked the doors, the House is in recess indefinitely until somebody moves on something.
Do you think the former speaker has another shot?
We asked him that point blank as he departed the House floor after the vote to vacate his position. He didn't answer. He just said he'd be making a statement eventually. He went right back to his office, the one you and I know quite well, there on the second floor of the House.
Scott, real quick, because we both were there talking to him, do you think this caught him off guard, or was he prepared for this possibility?
I think after that first test vote, there was no surprise. Whether he was expecting this as the day progressed, when you talked to him, I talked to him, you could sense a little bit of apprehension that he was resigned to the fact that he could go if the votes aligned against him today. He said in so many words, if 5 Republicans join all the Democrats, yeah, I'm gone. And 8 did on the final vote. So for now, he's no longer the speaker.
All right, Scott MacFarlane, we thank you so much for your steadfast reporting, and we'll talk to you, I'm sure, in the days ahead. And now to some other news we're following. Hunter Biden has pleaded not guilty to 3 felony firearms charges. It comes nearly 2 months after a pre-negotiated deal with prosecutors publicly fell apart. If convicted on all 3 charges, the president's son faces a maximum of 25 years in prison and up to $750,000 in fines. And Catherine Herridge joins us now. Catherine, thanks so much for being with us. Of course, you spent the day in court. Bring us up to speed on what happened.
Well, Nicole, good to be with you. This was an extraordinary day in the courthouse behind me. The son of a sitting president entering a not guilty plea for 3 felony gun offenses. The allegation is that he lied about his drug use in 2018 to obtain and purchase a weapon. What was striking is that as he entered courtroom 2A, I was about 5 feet from him, and there was that sense of nervous energy, a kind of nervous smile, and a real deep sense of apprehension, because the last time he was in the courthouse, this plea deal, which included 2 misdemeanor tax charges and a felony gun offense, collapsed, and that opened the door to today's arraignment. He was asked a series of questions by the judge if he understood the serious nature of the charges, the serious penalties that can be jail time if he's convicted. And in each response, he spoke in a soft but very determined tone, saying, "Yes, Your Honor." Ultimately, the not guilty plea was entered by his attorney, Abbe Lowell. The next deadline for the court, Nicole, is in early November, and both parties have an opportunity to file motions to the court in this case.
And break down, Hunter Biden, his defense team, and their strategy. What are they hoping to accomplish, and are they likely to succeed?
Well, there are a handful of elements to their defense strategy. One is that they're arguing that this original plea deal that contained what's called a diversion agreement is still valid. The government argues it was never a fully executed contract because it was not signed by the probation office. And clearly, they don't think it's valid because they brought these felony gun offenses. The second is a very intriguing question, and it's a constitutional question that's very much alive in the courts, including the Supreme Court, whether it's a violation of someone's Second Amendment right, in this case, someone who's a drug user or addicted to illegal substances, not to own a weapon. This is very much a live issue, but the legal experts we spoke to here at CBS News said it may help on one of the charges, but not all 3 in this particular case.
President Biden has said very little with respect to his son and his legal battles, but how could this impact his 2024 reelection campaign?
Well, this really was a day for the history books because, Nicole, if this case goes ahead, it's going to have a clear intersection or be on a collision course with the presidential election next year. And that doesn't even take into account that there could be more charges in this case filed in California or Washington, D.C., including tax violations.
All right. Catherine Herridge reporting for us from Wilmington, Delaware. Thank you. Well, that does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You are streaming CBS News.